learners of the Postgraduate Diploma in Environmental and Occupational Health. Welcome to this session of MEVE 004, that is Industrial Sectors. We will be discussing today on the iron and steel industry, their environmental and occupational hazards and the impacts that these industries have caused. So now the aims and the objectives of this session, and after listening to this lecture, you will be able to understand some of the basic processes that are used in the iron and steel industry, and what are the type of pollutants that are of concern which comes from these industries, and one or two case studies regarding to how this iron and steel industry dust is causing some concerns among even children and the household and the communities that are staying nearby these industries. And we will also come to know some of the best management practices which have been adopted by best industries and the companies, and how even the waste and the wealth could be obtained from waste from these industries. So some of the sustainable management practices from some of the good industries. So let us now start this session. The steel manufacturing industry. So this is one of the biggest industries in the world, and primarily the steel, it is sourced from iron ore. 98% of the mined ore, this goes into manufacturing steel. Steel is an essential commodity and it facilitates many other industries, and this includes the construction industry, the automobile machineries, the electrical equipments and a variety of products, and this ranges from the cookware to the furniture. So you would not see even one household without a steel vessel or a utensil. It is estimated that by the year 2050, the demand for steel will grow even by 5 more times. So manufacturing of steel, this is an energy intensive process, and this emits several pollutants including carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas, and some particulate matter. India, if we see, it is the second largest steel producer in the world, and in the year 2020, India overtook Japan to become the largest global producer of steel after China, and this too with a net crude steel production of 99.6 metric tons. So steel, if you see, this is a versatile commodity and that plays a major part in everyday life. So we can see that we use the steel in food cans, in the household containers and utensils, in automobiles, in office buildings, and sometimes they even form a part of many of the mobile and the other technological equipments that we use. So even from the morning, you start from your coffee machine or from your computers, everything has a component of steel in it. Until the last decade, the slag, the dust and the sludge which is generated by these integrated steel plants, this was called as waste. But now we term this as byproduct due to the intensive reutilization of these waste. And now we will see in the coming slides how these byproducts and how the waste materials can also be used sustainably, and also in the they could be reused and you could come up with some very good materials. Steel making, therefore, this is a process of producing steel from iron ore and or scrap. In steel making, there are several impurities such as the nitrogen, then silica, phosphorus, sulfur and excess carbon. All these are removed from the sourced iron, and then some alloying agents and elements are added such as manganese, nickel, chromium, then you have carbon, you have vanadium. All these are added in order to produce the various grades of the steel. Steel making, this has existed for millennia, but it was not commercialized on a massive scale until the late 14th century. Today, if we see, there are two major commercial processes for making steel, and this is mainly the basic oxygen steel making. This has the liquid pig iron from which the blast furnace and the scrap steel are used as a main feed material. Then you have another process which is known as the electric arc furnace steel making. This uses the scrap steel or the direct reduced iron as the main feed materials. Steel making is one of the most carbon emission intensive industries in the world. Now in the year 2020, if we have taken the estimates, steel making is estimated to be responsible for 7 to 9% of all the direct fossil fuel greenhouse gas emissions. So this is contributing a certain percentage. In order to mitigate global warming, the industry will need to find reductions in the emissions. In 2020, there have been scientific reports, especially by McKinsey. He identified a number of technologies for decarbonization, including hydrogen usage, carbon capture and reuse, and maximizing the use of electric arc furnaces powered by clean energy. Now, these days we are using a modern steel making processes. This can be divided into 3 steps, that is the primary, secondary and the tertiary steel making. Now, let us first see the primary steel making. This involves smelting of the iron into steel. The secondary process involves adding or removing other elements such as alloying agents and dissolved gases. In the tertiary steel making, this involves the casting into sheets or rolls or any other form of the steel which is desired. Therefore, multiple techniques are available for each step. The development of the steel industry, this has brought with it several environmental degradation and environmental pollution problems. With the rapid and intensive industrialization and urbanization in several parts of India which we are focusing, this has resulted in high levels of pollution. Now, the processes involved in steel making. The first step involves mining of the iron ore. So, that is crucial in the step. Then this is a very polluting process and that uses coal for blasting, etc. Then this itself will release a lot of pollutants like the oxides of sulfur, lot of particulate matter and fugitive dust. Coke oven. The coke oven emissions, these are a mixture of coal tar, volatile organic carbons and the arsenic, beryllium and chromium, which are all heavy metals. These are all toxic and they may be even carcinogenic, and we have discussed in some of the lectures and the sessions of this course of this diploma, PG diploma, where we have dealt with the heavy metals and their toxic effects on the human health. Blast furnace. So, in the blast furnace, the iron ore is melted into liquid iron, and this method is known as the basic oxygen method. A mixture of metallic ore, coke and fluxic agents such as the limestone, this will be fed into the furnace and the result is pig iron or the crude iron, which is later converted to steel. An alternate step which we discussed earlier was the electric arc furnace method. This uses high temperature and that is why we term it as electric, and it uses the high temperature to melt the scrap steel instead of the pig iron. Both the processes, they will release the pollutants such as the hydrocarbons, carbon monoxide, particulate matter, nitrogen oxides and also the sulfur oxides. So, steel making process, we are seeing that in the, we have seen the primary, secondary and the tertiary processes, and the hot rollers are used to make the steel bend into a desired shape, and in the process it will also involve shaping, drilling, welding, coating with zinc, then tempering with the heat and surface treatments. So, all these, it will release the particulate matter and oxides of carbon, nitrogen and sulfur, and all these can cause several environmental and the human health problems. Air pollution. So, this is a main problem and the steel industry is the third largest contributor to air pollution, and it is one of the largest contributors to the emission of carbon dioxides. Steel particularly, this requires coal for energy. So, a lot of emission is caused by the coal combustion, and the steel plants, they emit the air pollutants such as particulate matter, specifically the particulate matter 2.5 and particulate matter 10 depending on the size of the matter, the carbon dioxide, sulfur oxides, nitrogen oxides and the carbon monoxides. So, therefore, there is an urgent need for the pollution control which has to be taken up by such industries, and not having the effective pollution control systems in place, that can cause serious damage to an industry's brand image and reputation, apart from compromising the health of its workers and the communities. And also, when you violate these guidelines, it can also result in the shutdown of the steel plant. Fugitive emissions. So, what do we mean by fugitive? One of the major challenges faced by the steel industry is unaccounted or the fugitive emissions. Fugitive emissions, they refer to these pollutants that are fugitive or they can escape from a source without being accounted for. Regular emissions from known sources, they are accounted for and they can be easily tracked and also controlled, because when we know the source, the point source of any pollutant, then we can track and we can also take certain management practices in order to control the same. But when you don't know the source and when it is escaping as such, like without or it is an unintended release. So such emissions, the fugitive emissions, where we don't know the how they are being emitted, they are difficult to track because their source is unknown. Hence, they contribute to the ambient air pollution in an untraceable way. This occurs during every stage of the steel manufacturing process, and this is one of the major challenges which this industry has. Now let us come on to the occupational and environmental health hazards of these industries. The potential occupational hazard among the employees are mainly physical hazards. This includes the heat and the radiation exposures. So several of the employees who are working in the iron and steel industry, especially in South India, this also came as a science report in the current science in 2020. Here we have seen that the people are having a lot of problems related to the kidney, urination, and they are forming a lot of the kidney stones in their kidneys. So these calcified the stones, that is causing them problem, and sometimes they also have problems of the sterility and other issues related to the reproductive organs. So therefore physical hazards like heat and radiation exposures, and this also depends upon the amount of the heat that they are exposed to and the time of exposure, like how long they are coming over there. So therefore shift is definitely required, that a person, one employee works for a certain amount of time, a shift, and then he shifts on to another chamber where that is a different kind of a work which he is doing. Then we have the chemical hazards. So chemicals, as you all know, several chemicals are used in this industry, and that include the mist, the fumes, the gases, the chemicals, and so on. Then we have the mechanical hazards. Now mechanical hazards can cause backache, muscular pain, and so on. Then the psychosocial hazards. This can cause the headache, stress, and also depression among the employees and the workers. Now let us come on to specifically the physical hazards. So in this, there is excessive levels of ionizing and non-ionizing electromagnetic radiations, noise, vibration, illumination, and the temperatures. In occupations where there is exposure to the ionizing radiation, the time and the distance and shielding from these hazards are very important, where you can ensure the employee's safety. Danger from such radiations, that will increase with the increase in the exposure time. Now distance is a valuable tool in controlling the exposure to both ionizing as well as non-ionizing radiation. Therefore we all need to shield ourselves, which is a protection against radiation, and the greater the protective mass between a radioactive source and the employee, the lower the radiation exposure. In some instances, the limiting exposure to or increasing distance from certain forms of the non-ionizing radiation, such as lasers, it may not be very effective. For example, an exposure to laser radiation that is faster than the blinking of an eye, that can be hazardous, and that would require the employees to be miles away from the laser source before being adequately protected. So shielding workers from this source, that could be an effective control method. Noise. This is again another physical hazard, and that could be controlled by various measures. Noise can be reduced by installing the equipment and the systems that have been engineered, designed, and also built to operate quietly. They can also enclose such noisy machinery in the certain enclosures and shielding these equipments. And you can also see that these equipments are in good condition, that they are repaired periodically, and they are also properly maintained. We can also treat the floors and the ceilings and the walls with certain acoustical material, and that will reduce the reflected or the reverberant noise. Erecting the sound barriers at adjacent workstations around the noisy operations, that can also reduce the employees' exposure to noise generated at adjacent workstations. Another physical hazard, namely radiant heat exposure. This is very common in the steel plant. So radiant heat exposure, that can be controlled by installing the reflective shields and by providing protective clothing. Chemical hazards. Harmful chemical compounds. This could be in the form of solids, liquids, gases, mist, dust, fumes, and vapors. They all exert the toxic effects by inhalation, by ingestion, by absorption, the various routes of the exposure where the human is exposed to. Biological hazards. This is mainly bacteria, viruses, fungi, and other living organisms, and that can cause certain acute and chronic infections when they enter the body directly through breaks in the skin, and also it can also be transmitted from person to person. So therefore, in the biological hazard, this will only involve the effective personal hygiene and paying proper attention to the minor cuts or the scratches, and also the type of food that is given to the employee. Then these biological risks can be kept to a minimum therefore. The workers should also practice the proper personal hygiene, and particularly hand washing is very important for the biological hazards. Ergonomic hazards. This involves the excessive vibration, noise, eye strain, repetitive motion, heavy lifting and improperly designed tools or the work areas. This can lead to the ergonomic hazard. Now repeatedly when they are doing the same kind of work or lifting heavy items, like for example sorting, assembling, even data entry, this can cause inflammation of the wrist, of the hands, that can cause the carpal tunnel syndrome, and therefore you can also have the back pain, then the sprains and the strains, or stiff joints, necks, etc. Now let us go on to the types of solid waste generation. So in the iron and steel industry, we have the ferruginous and the non-ferruginous waste. In ferruginous waste, they are generated from the steel making, like the flue dust, the sludge from the blast furnace. In non-ferruginous, this involves the lime, broken refractory bricks, broken fire clay bricks, acetylene plant sludge and so on. Blast furnace flue dust and electric earth furnace dust, they are a mixture of the oxides and the coke fines. They also contain silicon, calcium, magnesium and some undesirable elements like zinc, lead and the alkali metals. Rolling mill sludge, this is also contaminated with the oil and the inorganic particles. Dry slag, this exhibits a high strength and high temperature endurance, and therefore this is also quite suitable for making the concrete aggregate. Wastewater from the drilling activity, so even from the drill cuttings, rejected drill cuttings, this can be contaminated with the hydrocarbons, sand, silt and mud, all along with the impurities and the components of the wastewater generated at the drill site. So this wastewater will be viscous, it is oily in nature and it can contain 6 to 8% of solids, high chemical oxygen demand, oil, grease and the heavy metals. The major components are mostly inorganic in nature. The same way wastewater from the processing facility. Now this water that is recovered during the emulsion breaking, it is called as produced water, and this is often recycled to remove the excess free oil. It can then be filtered and stored in the water tanks prior to the underground injection to enhance the recovery. So this produced water that can contain dissolved solids, chloride, emulsified oil, then chemical oxygen demand, biological oxygen demand and the heavy metal. However, irrespective of the pre-treatment, these wastes are characterized by high mineral content, salinity, oil, grease and also the hydrocarbon. Wastewater from the refinery process. This usually contains hydrogen sulfide, ammonia and the oil. Effects on the health and the environment. Therefore, we have already seen how the air pollutants can cause problem, and historically this has been an environmental concern in the context of the localized public health impacts that the industry can have on the densely populated areas. Emissions from this industry, this can again vary depending on the process employed, the type of process that they are using, engineering and construction of the plant, raw material and the energy inputs and effectiveness of the pollution control equipment. But generally we have seen that this generates a lot of volatile organic compounds and hazardous air pollutants through their processings. Polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon. So this is again another pollutant, and due to its persistence and bioaccumulation and toxicity in the surroundings, that is a cause of concern, and it also exhibits mutagenic and or carcinogenic properties. Now from the electric arc furnace, the polychlorinated dibenzo P dioxins and dibenzofurans, they can emit the sources of the air pollutants. In particular, the production will release several sulfur oxides, nitrogen oxides, lead and also a lot of the soot and the dust. Now these emissions, if you see, one of the case study which we could take up is one of the iron and steel industries which is located in Jamshedpur. Now the schools which are bordering these areas, there you can see that their playgrounds and the school themselves, they are actually covered by a thick layer of the red dust, because iron itself is red in color. So it has the red dust and it is covering these schools. The students and the faculty, the employees who are working in the school, they are complaining of eye irritation, a lot of breathing problems, asthmatics have again problems. So for those people who are also living close to these steel plants, the black and the red dust is very common, and that is causing a lot of the health concerns. Management. Therefore, some management practices such as carbon capture and sequestration, which is referred to as CCS, that can remove the carbon dioxide at source from the industrial plants, these are very expensive and they require high energy, and it can also be polluting. Studies show that this carbon capture and the sequestration, they can lead to 25% increase in emissions from the burning and the coal. So therefore, the only solution is an affordable one that can cover the large areas efficiently and which is also cost effective. So an ideal solution for the pollution control in the steel industries, they should be able to tackle the problem efficiently, they should address the fugitive emissions, and it should be cost effective and also sustainable. Some of the notable green practices which are followed by some steel industries, they have been instrumental. Now the sustainable light steel frame construction. This is a type of construction with steel which involves pre-engineered parts. They are easy to set up and dismantle as well. Now these steel frame construction, they require less extensive foundation and they also involve lesser time. They also considerably reduce the emissions at the construction sites. Then packaging with steel. Steel contributes extensively to the circular economy since it can be endlessly recycled and remade without any loss to the quality. Therefore, companies have started taking advantage of this benefit by reusing and recycling these steel bottles and jars, and you can pack the consumer goods such as shampoos or conditioners and even the food items. Using slag to sustain the marine environment. Now, this was one case study. The steel companies such as POSCO in Japan, they have been using the steel containers made of slag, which is a byproduct of steel, to fight the desertification of the marine algae forest in the South Korean coast. This they have been doing from the year 2007. So slag is a dense rock-like material and algae is planted in these slag containers, and their density and the weight, this protects the algae forest from typhoons and also from the tsunamis. Management of waste used by several other industries. One example which I would like to cite is that of the Jindal Steel and Power. Through their extensive research and development activities, they have identified several things, and the company is also seriously working on the 3 R's, that is the recycle, reduce and the reuse, in order to manage its waste. They have several innovative projects under the wealth from waste. They have been implemented for the solid waste utilization, and the main objective of their company is to transform the solid waste into wealth in order to benefit from this. Biomethanation plants. These have been installed in Chhattisgarh in association with the BARC in Mumbai for the biogas production. In the same way, biodegradable waste from the residential areas, that is collected, segregated, and then it could be fed into the those machines. So this ash is partly used for the brick making, for the ash dike rising, for the roads and the embankment construction, and cement manufacturing, and also land filling. So these are some of the innovative and green practices and the management practices which have been done by some of the notable companies and the industries. Therefore, my dear learners, in this session we have understood about the processes that are involved in the iron and steel industry, the different type of pollutants that are generated from these industries, the various environmental and occupational hazards that are coming out, and how the people are getting affected from these industries, and finally the management practices and green and sustainable practices which have some of the companies have come up with. I hope you have had a good understanding of this session. Thank you for your patient listening.